Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, July 15th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, and a special guest, Melissa Lockard, joins us today as we discuss day one of the MLB Draft. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Did I read this right? This is the 20th draft you've covered now?
Yeah. I think 2004 was my first. So if I'm doing my math right, it's either 20 or 21.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of that, of course, focused on the A's over the years, too. But a lot to talk about in this class, a college-heavy top end of the class, which is exciting, I think, from a fantasy perspective, because those players tend to move to the big leagues a lot faster. So if you're in a keeper or dynasty league, you can look at these players and maybe see them helping you by this time next year, or since the Angels picked 8th, maybe by the end of this season, in the case of Christian Moore, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But let's start at the top of the board, where Travis Bazzana was the first overall pick of the Guardians. He was certainly in that conversation all spring. The interesting thing for me with Bazzana is this: he's a second baseman. Like, we don't normally think of second baseman as early first round picks. And maybe that's the result of shift restrictions and it being less of a place where you hide someone in the dirt than it was even a few years ago. But of course, Bazzana goes first overall because of his bat. So what type of impact are you expecting from Bazzana as he makes his way through that Guardian system and eventually becomes a prominent part of that lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually is probably quicker than it would be. You know, I think he's a guy that's going to get there really fast. He's very polished. He's even played some pro ball, in the summer leagues and also in Australia before he even came to the United States. So he's used to high level competition. He's got a great swing, great pitch recognition. And, I think we put a lot of value on defensive positioning for the draft because you want to have a lot of options, right? And guys that play shortstop, guys that play center field can default to other things. But I think when you're looking at players that you kind of know are going to get there fast and they're going to play a certain position, all positions are valuable. And if you can put somebody in there and say he's going to be an all-star at this position, I'm not so sure that you have to worry as much about the fact that he's just limited to the one, because there's not as much of a need to have a safety net with some of these guys. And so I think that's what you saw. This isn't a class that had a ton of super toolsy high projection guys, but I think you do see a lot of guys who can fit into big league lineups pretty quickly. And that's what you really saw, especially at the top of this draft.
It's interesting. Is there kind of a mini trend here with the second base thing? I mean, JJ Weatherholt and Christian Moore, also second baseman. And traditionally, I feel like second base has been kind of a place that organizations find a guy rather than draft a guy or try to acquire a guy. It's more like used to be a shortstop, used to be a third baseman, didn't have enough range, didn't have enough arm. Why is it a little bit of a ding on them athletically that they didn't play short for their teams? I do see that to some extent they're from powerhouses, like from big colleges. Did they have great shortstops on their teams that kind of pushed them to second, or do you think there is a little bit of a question about that athleticism given that they played second in college?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times it has to do with arm strength and kind of being limited to second base if the arm isn't there. Weatherholt did actually play a decent amount of shortstop this year and would have played more had he not, missed all that time with the hamstring. And I think there is some thought that he'll go out as a shortstop and they'll sort of see what happens there. I think Christian Moore has played a little bit of third base too. I think he might move around. He could even be an option in left field. But I think the biggest trend more is that you're looking at the fact that you do have 9 spots on the field and you want production from those 9 spots. And I do think that teams are able to kind of coach up defense a little bit better maybe than they used to be able to in the past. I don't think you necessarily see guys relying on their pure athleticism anymore to be great defenders. I think there's a lot of teaching and coaching involved that gets guys to coach up. I mean, there's a lot of guys playing shortstop in the big leagues now that were not necessarily even shortstops in the early minors, which is interesting, right? Like that's kind of a different trend. So I think that's part of it, but I think it's more just a matter of looking for the best hitters that you can find available. And that's what you really saw yesterday.
Yeah, I want to skip the second pick for now and talk about the guy that went third, because it was the Golden Spikes winner, Charlie Condon out of Georgia, going to Colorado. And we know hitters going into Colorado get that extra bump from Coors Field. But what do you think of Condon from a hit tool perspective? How difficult do you think it might be for him to make the adjustments of having to hit at altitude, but then go away from altitude where pitches move differently. We've seen a lot of players struggle with that over the years. And Condon's a guy that had some pretty sharp home road splits during his time at Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting guy just in general because he didn't really have much of a profile coming into Georgia. You know, he walked onto the program. He isn't a guy that was heavily recruited. So he's sort of been like an underdog kind of late bloomer type. And I think it's a little hard sometimes to look at like, you know, past trends with someone like that because it came on so quickly. On the other hand, you know, I think if you were looking for like a 1-1 sort of profile in a traditional draft, he was that guy in the sense that not only is he, you know, a power hitter who's got a good hit tool, very athletic, but he does have a chance to stay up the middle and play in center field, maybe more likely to move over to right. But like, I think, you know, there's some athleticism there, could even get some time at third base. I've seen, you know, kind of comps to, you know, Chris Bryant. Obviously they're hoping for the Cubs, Chris Bryant, not the Rockies, Chris Bryant, but I think, you know, those long levers, the power, you know, the ability to move around the field, just the pure athleticism. If he's able to continue the gains that he made at Georgia and carry those over, I think he's a really exciting player for Colorado.
Yeah. Does he have any similarities? I mean, I guess he's not as fast as Langford. Langford is more of a 65-70 runner, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's not as fast, but he has a better arm. Like Langford was always sort of a guy that you thought had to be put in left field a little bit because of the arm strength thing. So, you know, what you give away in one, you do another. And again, I think it's sort of similar to shortstop. There's a lot of center fielders playing center field in the big leagues right now who you would not have pegged to be center fielders when they first came into the league. I think, again, teams are maximizing so much what they can get offensively from every position, that you're seeing atypical players at a lot of different positions. So he may be one of those more atypical, maybe Cody Bellinger type center fielder, you know, that's not a guy that you would have imagined to be a center fielder, but he is, you know.
It also occurs to me to ask you what you think about sort of trends in terms of moving guys fast. I feel like we're in a little bit of turbulence right now across baseball because of COVID, because of the lost year in the minors. But I think also given stuff, you know, like literally like Stuff Plus or bat path grades or, you know, these, you know, kind of analytical process stats, there has been a little bit of like, hey, I don't care as much about the results in the minors. He has 3+ pitches. I think he's ready for the big leagues. All right. He's making good swing decisions and hitting the ball hard. I think we can move him up. Do you have a sense of like which organizations push guys further than other guys, you know, like other organizations, you know? The joke is the Angels. I know. Yeah.
They're an outlier for outliers, right? Like, exactly. I don't even know what we can necessarily. I think we could put Christian Moore in the lineup next week. But yeah, I mean, I think minor league baseball is in a really weird spot right now, where, as you say, I think you can plug in a lot of these pitchers coming out of, you know, like say AA into big league rotations, into big league bullpens, and know what you're almost going to get based on the fact of, you know, what you're seeing from all the analytics, that, you know, the pitch shapes and everything else that they're doing. Probably the mental side of it is the one thing you can't predict as much, like who's going to wither under that, you know, pressure and who isn't. But it's a lot easier to translate what you're going to see in the big leagues with the pitchers. With the hitters, though, it's really been hard because in part those pitchers are moving so fast. There's no one good to face in the minor leagues. Right? Like you're almost at the point where you're looking at a situation where they're facing org guys, and you're trying to challenge hitters, and you're looking at the situation too where hitters are moving so quickly, they're not learning to fail at different spots like they used to. So they're getting to the big leagues, they're failing for the first time, and there's not that sort of learned ability to know where to dig yourself out of it. I think, you know, with Jackson Holliday, you saw that a little bit. You know, you mentioned the Oakland A's. They're going to have an interesting decision coming up with Jacob Wilson. I think he's likely to get recalled in the next couple of weeks. And he just hasn't been challenged at any level in the minor leagues at all. But, you know, there are questions.
Which is not to say there aren't questions. Yeah, there's questions
there are questions about, you know, his pitch decisions and the ones that he tends to swing at, but he can hit all of them right now. And so do you keep him in a situation where he's continually getting hits off of pitchers he shouldn't swing at, or do you put him in the big leagues and actually, you know, have him face pitchers that can get him out with those pitches? And so I think more and more organizations are having to make decisions like that, because there's just such a big difference between the top talent in the minor leagues right now and everybody else. And I don't think we've ever had such a huge schism between those two, or at least not since I've been covering it.
Given all that, do you have a pick in this, top 10 or in this draft of her moving faster?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a lot of it depends on need too, right? Like I think Cleveland probably doesn't need to bring up somebody to their, I mean, they could use help in certain situations, but I don't think Travis Bazzana is going to be a guy they hope to help them, win the pennant this year. But, I think the Angels are always going to be your pick to move guys, not just Christian Moore, but you look at Chris Cortez, you could see him in their bullpen pretty quickly. It's these types of teams are going to make these decisions fast. But obviously, like Pittsburgh picking the first high school player, and that came at pick 9. Connor Griffin is going to not move quickly. And I think that was an interesting decision from the perspective of they do have this young core that's now starting to get to the big leagues, and they've added somebody who isn't going to get there as fast. But definitely, I think, had the most talent in this draft class. So, that was another decision that they had to make where, do you try to time up his timeline with Paul Skeens and the guys that they've got going on in the leagues right now, or do you look for the best player you can possibly get? And I think they went with the latter, which I don't think is necessarily the wrong decision, but it's just an interesting decision to have made.
Yeah, because there's probably a case for the Pirates to have taken Trey Yesavage, who fell all the way to the Blue Jays at 20 in that spot, because they could add him to their rotation within the next calendar year, and it wouldn't be that much of a stretch. I think Chase Burns is kind of interesting. He went 2nd overall to the Reds. I remember seeing some numbers about his fastball, absurd IVB. We talk about that all the time. A lot of ride on the fastball. It is important to point out the college baseball is a little bit different than the Major League Baseball, so there will be some fluctuations with things like that. You're going to see some numbers that aren't necessarily replicated in pro ball, but 20 inches of ride on a fastball, even with a college ball, is really impressive. Fantastic numbers from Chase Burns at Wake. Is he going to be unfairly comped to Paul Skeens, who is just delivering an incredible rookie season for the Pirates right now, because Burns had really dominant numbers in college and does seem to have a big league arsenal that will help him move very quickly?
I hope not. I mean, I think it's sort of like when you see these draft shows and they start comping guys to Hall of Famers and All-Stars, like that's just not fair, right? Like there is only one Paul Skeens, and he was a once in a lifetime guy. You might see a draft player like that, every 10 years, every 20 years or whatever, but he's a unicorn. I think Chase Burns can be an outstanding major league starter. But to compare him to Paul Skeens, I don't think that would be fair. But, that said, I think, he had such great stuff at Tennessee. And then he goes to Wake Forest. They have that pitching lab. He puts a lot of work in. He's coming, and it is an interesting situation too. Some of these schools, these guys are getting to the big leagues with more data and understanding of what they're doing than some of these guys that have been in pro ball since they were in high school, right? So he's coming armed with knowing what he needs to do, of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I have a feeling you get into, what the Reds have already built there, and things could even click faster for him. And what changes he'll see with the ride and everything else with the new ball should probably be more apparent to someone like him who's used to the data than maybe somebody who came from a program that didn't have a pitching lab like Wake Forest.
He also has more traditional stuff with like a capital S than Skeens did. I mean, we had people talking about Skeens' fastball shape. Burns doesn't have that question, and in terms of, being major league ready, having an 89, 90 mile an hour breaking ball, he could be in the pen, I feel like, today. It's just a question of third pitch, kind of feel, getting through the order, multiple times, seeing what the pro schedule is way different than the college schedule, so I could see him moving pretty fast with that starter package for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting about the Major League Draft, right? Like you have a situation where like Cleveland looking at one could have said, we'll take this guy, put him in our bullpen.
We need.
And they could have, realistically, like at the Royals, I think was in 2014, right, where they did that with Greg Holland. I mean, I think there are situations where, maybe for the history of the franchise, if you thought this was your year, you might try to do something like that. But
that's so not the Guardians, though, right?
No, it's also, it's probably not the best thing long term. Like, you only get a number. This is the first time they've picked number one in the history of the Cleveland, franchise. That's a long time. So you're not going to get that opportunity again. Exactly. So I mean, if you get a guy that's going to be hitting, 320 with 15, 20 homers and, like what you can see from Bazzana year after year, I mean, I think that's probably worth, kind of punting a little bit on the chance of having Burns in your bullpen this year.
I was talking to an AGM and was talking about, I forget who, what pick or something. And I was talking about need, and I was like, y'all don't like pick based on need, do you? And he's like, well, it can be like a tiebreaker sometimes, if you're like, well, we have a great this and, we could use a great that instead, but I also think of Sam Blum's scathing piece this past week about the Angels all pitcher draft. It was pretty good. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. They took all pitchers. Everyone was like, what is happening? Is this are they really doing this? They had a whole draft full of pitchers, and the only good ones that they picked are on other teams, it looks like. So it is interesting when you look at this draft, and I think it was fairly vanilla in terms of how it turned out. Nobody did anything weird. That was one of the Keith's big takeaways, was like, of the top 30, I had 25 in my top 30, of the first ones picked, nobody was not in my top 100, and I think we've seen, I trying to think of the Red Sox first round pick. Nick York was like, that was way out of left field. Do we have a Nick York this year? I feel like the closest is Yesavage dropping a little bit, but
I mean, Braylon Payne went 17 to Milwaukee, and I think they didn't necessarily think he was going to be a first round pick, but he was going to be very certainly a day one pick. And I think what Milwaukee did the rest of the, day one sort of made sense for like what number they're going to get Payne to sign for is going to allow them to do other things. And they've done that. Last year they got Cooper Pratt in the 6th round, and he's already in the futures game. And it was, partly because they were able to save some money up top. And so if they knew they wanted him anyway, and they weren't sure they were going to get him in their next pick, it makes sense to get him at a discount there and then use that money to do some different things later on. But I don't think there was anything that was like crazy out to left field in terms of players that were there. And there certainly wasn't anyone scrambling at the desk looking for notes last night. Like you every once in a while see that situation. The Nick York one was interesting too, because I had done a little piece on like Bay Area, draft prospects for 2020. And he was a guy that had come up from folks here who had seen him right before the pandemic. They were very excited about him, but pandemic shut everything down. He had come off an injury. And so I think that was a matter of like, that year was so strange that like the Red Sox probably saw him in a moment where he was, getting what we're seeing out here, but the rest of the country hadn't necessarily been in at that particular time. So that happens a lot with the draft, because you're not looking at a college, football schedule where everybody's on TV and you see exactly what you're looking at. There's so many moments when a scout can see somebody that nobody else knows about that makes the pick make 100% sense in the draft room, but makes no sense to anybody outside of it. That, for me, it's hard to judge, draft picks as being like wrong or bad, because we're not in the room with those kind of conversations at this point.
I guess last year, one of the big surprises, head scratchers, whatever, was Xavier Isaac. And then he went and had a great time in the minors, I think. And then he had a really poor futures game.
I mean, he's been a little more inconsistent. I think he's, again, a high school first baseman is not, if you're looking at prototypical positions not to take off the board in the first round, high school first basemen are certainly not it. But then, you look at like, for instance, Matt Olson was a very high pick as a high school first baseman. He wasn't first round, but he was in that compensation area. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that as a first round pick later on, right? Like, it's just a matter of it has to click in a very specific way. And if, there's no fallback that somebody's going to become, some other position or do something else athletically, because if you're stuck at first base in high school, there's kind of a sense of that's where that's going. I guess, PJ Orlando going to the Marlins, I think at 16, He was somebody who was very polarizing. I met him at the combine, great kid, hit the ball extremely hard, and I think really built back a lot of his value at the combine because he had a really crazy high school year where basically the high school coaches just didn't pitch to him. So he was intentionally walked like a ridiculous number of times, was hardly challenged at all. But, and he has an unusual setup. He'd made some adjustments to it and didn't really get to use them in game because no one was throwing in many pitches. So
oh no.
Yeah, right. So but he went to the combine, got to show off a little bit of a toe tap, which he hadn't been using before. He'd sort of been ultra wide and no stride. And, that might have helped kind of bring him back into the Marlins picture in terms of this is a guy who can hit for the kind of power that people thought he could hit with when he won that home run derby last year at the high school All-Star, showcase. So, or at the All-Star game, the high school home run derby. So I think, again, those are the sort of decisions that you don't necessarily understand from the outside, but you could see how maybe it would have come together on the inside. And it's, I guess, Peter Bendix would have been involved in the Xavier Isaac decision in Tampa, and now he's leading that decision for
Orlando.
Maybe he's got a type too. Who knows?
He's okay with it. I mean, it makes me think a little bit of like raw materials versus somebody who's maxed out already. I'm not going to say this about Burns because he went too. But like if you had another person in his rotation that was at Wake Forest and you thought he was maxed out and you were comparing him to maybe a high school arm that hadn't had the same instruction. I remember talking to who's the big slider guy in the Arizona bullpen, and they thought he'd be a pitcher. He thought he'd be a starter. Derek,
Justin Martinez?
No, they thought he'd be a starter. He's like a middle guy for them. Anyway, he came out of Duke, I think, and I did
Bryce Jarvis.
Bryce Jarvis. I did an interview with him, and he like I even asked him, "Do you feel maxed out? Like, do you think you're getting the best of like you've done all the pitch changes you can?" Because he was talking that language, So I wonder if with Orlando, I was also talking to Matt Wallner recently about he was super wide, and part of what the Twins did was kind of shorten him and give him a kick, give him a step. And now he has like the second fastest bat speed in the big leagues. I'm not saying that Wallner is, the most amazing outcome, but I think maybe with Orlando, they saw like some raw materials they could work with. And,
and I did see him hit one that was like 450 and it was BP at the combine. But I mean, the raw power there from a guy who, maybe still needs some additional work on the setup is pretty impressive. So, I think that was a lot there. And again, like he was a guy who I think if we had been having this conversation at this time last year was someone who was in the discussion for, top half of the first round at that point. So if the Marlins still liked him the way they liked him at that point, regardless of whatever noise, came up with the weird high school season, then the pick sort of makes more sense. But even then, I think none of those were so shocking that it was like, I can't believe they just made those picks the way that you've seen in some other drafts in past years.
I think it's interesting that, 20 years covering draft for the A's, like so many teams feel like they change because the front office has changed, the personnel throughout the front office is different. The A's, I think, are still somewhat predictable. Like I think there are players I look at and go, that makes sense. Nick Kurtz to the A's makes sense. A college first baseman out of Wake, nice floor. I think Keith put the Andrew Vaughn sort of comp on him, which is a more reasonable way to make comps. Take players who are reasonably drafted and haven't hit their ceilings yet and say, like, that might be what you're getting. What do you think of Kurtz? How do you think he fits in with the A's? And does he fit in this group of guys that could move pretty quickly through the minor leagues based on what he did in college?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a nice fit. You can go back and forth on whether they should have taken Weatherholt or Montgomery instead. But I do think he fits a pretty good spot in their system. They have a lot of power. I think you saw that even just in Philadelphia this weekend. There's a lot of young players that can hit for a lot of power, but they can't take a walk to save their lives, which is ironic, I think, given the organization's ethos. And they could use some guys that are coming in with better plate discipline than they've had. They've been trying to build it in the system, and I don't know that they're necessarily having a lot of success building plate discipline within the system. So here's a guy that comes in that already has extremely good pitch recognition. He has a really strong idea of what he wants to do at the plate. His approach is very much like, I'm only going to hit the things that I know I can do damage on, and I'm not going to let pitchers beat me. He was a pitcher in high school. He says he still uses that, kind of mentality as he's at the plate, like, how would I get myself out? So I think that fits really well. They also, frankly, don't have any first baseman in their system. I mean, I know that, Tyler Soderstrom's been playing first base, and I think he's actually looked really athletic there. And I think he could be a first baseman long term. But if they like what he's doing and they think he could move around even to left field or get back behind the plate for like a third of the games or something, there's some flexibility there. And beyond him, it's like Will Simpson and High A, and there are no other real first basemen in that system. So there's a lot of room for him to move up pretty quickly. I think he speaks their language already. They've always drafted well out of that area of the country. Neil Avon's been their area scout there for a long time, has done a really great job. So they know that Wake program in and out in terms of not just what you see on the paper, but who the kids are. So I think it's a fairly safe pick for them. And it is probably one that they could match up with the younger guys that are coming up pretty quickly, sort of different to what we talked about with the Pirates.
There was a couple, interesting, multifaceted players. You got Jac Caglianone to the Royals, announced as a two-way player. Keith said, so much power that he's probably not going to pitch much. And then Cijntje, the Jurrangelo Cijntje, he was announced as a switch-handed pitcher, which is weird because we don't ask people as switch-handed hitters. So I guess a switch pitcher was the term that Keith came up with. You have these guys. I think of the guy that the A's had for a while. That was that pitcher most. Yeah, Venditti. I think of just most recently the two guys that the Giants picked, in Bryce Eldridge and Reggie Crawford, who were both two-way guys and kind of announced as such and coached as such. They've all become one-faceted, the ones that we've done in the past. I think Venditti had a better side, and so, scouting reports on Sanchez say he's a better right-handed reliever. So I wonder if you just have any thoughts about, the possibility that we get another Ohtani, or we get a legit switch pitcher, or is there just the way that baseball works is they find the thing you do best and you gravitate towards the things you do best because you're just trying to optimize outputs. Really, it's all sort of about efficiency and stuff. So I just wonder if you had any thoughts about that kind of trend and that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of Caglianone, I'd be curious as to why they announced him as a two-way player. I think that even just listening to the Royals talk about him after the draft, it didn't really sound like they had that.
They just kept talking about his power or whatever, right?
That was something that Jac really wanted. But, he's going to be a hitter. Like I think the arm is very special, but, there's so much to do to get him to be a really good pitcher that I think it would be very detrimental to his development as a hitter to have to be doing that much work as a pitcher. Plus, he did already have Tommy John surgery. And do you want a situation where, your big middle of the order bat blows out his elbow because he's going to be a late inning, like a middle inning reliever for you, because I think that's probably his more likely outcome. It's
even hard. I mean, it's just hard structurally as a manager to even make him your closer because of he has to be somehow warming up.
Well, it's funny because the Mets took Carson Bench and they did not announce him as a two-way player, but he was, as much a two-way player as Jac was for Oklahoma State. And, and ironically, he actually joined Nolan McLean in that Mets system. They were roommates at Oklahoma State, both two-way players. But Nolan's going to be more of a pitcher, and I think almost everyone saw Carson is going to be more of an outfielder. But legitimately, he's got an arm. You could see him being a reliever in the big leagues and somewhat quickly. And what he said he did to be a closer at Oklahoma State, he would warm up in the outfield. Like he was like, his center fielder was his throwing partner. He would warm up in the outfield and then run in from right field to be
like as a manager or as like a GM. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, I know.
Is there a way for two people to get hurt in my outfield at the same time? Like one guy throws 98 and the other guy's, unprotected place.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, but at the same time, like the movie cinema of that, this kind of riding in, he's hit 2 home runs and he comes in and he's the closer.
Oh man, yeah, I thought Ohtani would end up. Honestly, that's what I thought Ohtani would be. So much fun. Right. And maybe we will get to that point. Maybe that's where I mean, I'm sure it's biased because of his size and the Florida thing, but like Caglianone looks a little like AJ Puck, like the way that when he's throwing the ball, right? So you could see that sort of like hits a bunch of home runs and then runs out there and does AJ Puck things at the end of the game. I mean, it probably won't happen, but it'd be sort of fun to imagine it happening. And I think, again, when people can do more than one thing, and that's sort of what we talked about with when you had someone who can play shortstop, is the possibilities are more, you have more options for like where that career can go. I mean, you look at like dating back to Sean Doolittle, he was this two-way player at Virginia. They took him as an outfielder first baseman. He was going to be a big leaguer as an outfielder first baseman, and if he hadn't gotten hurt. But when he did get hurt, he had pitching to fall back on, and 13 years later or whatever, he's got a long big league career. So having options is always good. I think with Cijntje, he's so unusual in the fact that like we've never had a switch pitcher who can legitimately blow hitters away from both sides, right? Like he's 92 from the left side, even like that's way different than Venditti, as good as he was, and as kind of 80s.
Yeah, he was a finesse guy, somebody who used deception. I don't think there's a lot of deception that he needs from either side, Jurrangelo. So like I think what he can do, we don't know yet. Like the possibilities are kind of endless, and I think he tends to be more to favor the right side, even against left-handed hitters at times, especially if the platoon splits work that way. But if he can pull left-handed out of the pocket against, say he's going along right-handed, but there's a hitter that comes up that just kills right-handed pitching, and he can just switch into that a couple times a game. That sort of option is pretty, like we've never really had anything like that, right? So I think it's pretty cool. And Seattle has such a good system right now that was an interesting and good risk to take at that point, because they can take their time with him a little bit, with the way things are. Their pitching's really good and young. They've got a lot of good young hitters already in there. So, why not kind of see how this looks and then figure it out as they go along?
Yeah.
I'm curious, looking back at the top of the board just again for a minute, like the White Sox got Hagen Smith at 5 and Burns at 2 versus Smith at 5. That was a fair toss-up, I think, looking at those two guys. Who do you like better, or how do you kind of compare those two guys, at least, as very productive college pitchers that should be successful as big league starters?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends on like if you're somebody who just is always going to favor a left-handed pitcher, if you have the opportunity to have a left-handed starter that can dominate, right? Like, because those are kind of rarer. On the other hand, I think Burns' stuff, would be more of the expert on this and that, but I think his stuff does grade out a little bit higher than Smith's, just from like the raw, like numbers of it. But Smith, I mean, he was good, and he was good consistently. I mean, that game he pitched against Oregon State, back at that Globe Life Classic, I think Keith has said, like, scouts have said it's the best college pitch game they've ever seen. Like that's unusual, and he kind of stepped up to the plate all the time. He's kind of built in a way that's a little slight, that you kind of worry, will he be able to hold up over 180, 200 innings? But other than that, yeah, I mean, I think that's, the White Sox need everything, obviously, but I think he's a good fit for them. I think he could get there pretty quickly for them as well. I think, the whole mustache, curly hair thing is going to play great in Chicago. And And if you can get a good left-handed starter, that's a great way to start building a rotation. So if Crochet's not going to be there much longer, he's the guy that could kind of come in there and maybe in a year or so and take his plays.
Yeah, the one thing from the stuff angle that's interesting about the two is that Burns has really good ride, but he has it from a more vertical release point. So that's sort of a little bit more expected ride, whereas Hagen has a lower release point on that. And that's kind of what teams are kind of analytically looking for. I've even had pitchers be like, I wish I was shorter, which is kind of really backwards for what it used to be like. And so I could see Hagen having a little bit more sort of deception on the same amount of ride or whatever. And then again, like, I'm not sure where this is anymore, but you kind of almost want to give a left-hander an extra mile or two when you're in terms of miles per hour when you're judging them, just because there's fewer of them. They don't have the same velo generally, and their velo plays up often. So, I like that. One thing that stood out to me, Jeff Pontus did a piece with Stuff Plus in it over at Baseball Prospectus, was that Yesavage was not, I wouldn't say better than either two, but I would say in their class. And, he has, according to Jeff, 22 inches of vertical, which is just like that. We don't have that in the big leagues. And he was like, well, that might have been a misread. It might, may not read that as such on Hawkeye. The major league pitch tracking, but he was like really, really liked Yesavage's mix. The Stuff Plus was on par with the other three. So I guess that was just a little bit more of draft dynamics that Yesavage fell. We talked a little bit about this, but.
Yeah, I was actually, that was very surprising to me that he fell out of the top 15. I mean, I think I thought sort of 13 or so sounded like it was going to be his floor, and to get to 20, I think Toronto too, like to get somebody like him. They've added some high school arms and high school hitters in the last few years at that spot that have sort of taken a little time to get going. Have had some injuries. You look at Ricky Tideman's having another injury issue now. They need help more immediately. They're, I think, probably going to be rebuilding here in a couple of weeks anyway. But he is a guy who, the Angels were tied to him for a long time because people thought he could plug into their rotation in like 2 weeks, right? So,
like a nice wide arsenal, right? It's like 4 good pitchers.
And it's unusual. I mean, I think the big question for him is from what Keith has said, is that, the mechanics are such that you do sort of wonder, like, is that going to hold up for a starter? Is it going to be more reliever-ish long term? But the only injury he had was that dry needling thing that had nothing to do with pitching. And he was very durable. He came back after that and beat Chase Burns.
A what thing?
He had a collapsed lung at the end of the season. He had to miss the AAC final, I think it was. But he came back and pitched in the regional against Wake Forest and beat Chase Burns after that, having had that happen. But there was some thought that maybe that had him slip on a few boards. I don't know why that would be, because it clearly, he seems fine. But that is one where, the durability has been there, and from the college perspective, with the exception of that very freak thing that happened. So, I thought Toronto got really good value there. And it is somebody that, if you were going to see someone move fairly quickly, I think he could be one of those guys. They may not push him much this year, just given the long college season, but next year, start out in high A and move pretty fast from there.
I thought it was interesting that the Orioles took Vance Honeycutt just because the strikeout rate in college is pretty high. And I think when we consider the limited quality of pitching at so many places, that seems riskier right now. But the Orioles have kind of shown this ability with some of the guys they have in the big leagues right now of improving strikeout rates, moving through the minor league system. Like, they might have an ability to improve plate discipline. So I'm just curious, like, are there certain picks you saw where the organization is going to give you more confidence in them ultimately being right about the player? And is Honeycutt one of those picks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's certainly made sense for the Orioles, given what they have been doing. He, like Honeycutt, is up there with Griffin in terms of tools, right? For this draft being maybe elite among everybody else. He can do everything but the hit tool, which is a weird thing to say because the hit tool is pretty important. But, he's a grade 70 defender, grade 70 runner. He's got big power. So it's just if he can hit it enough. But we have seen a lot of those guys in professional baseball, and that one thing becomes too insurmountable to really come together. The Orioles have done a very good job.
I'm hearing Joe Adele a little bit.
There's a lot of them, right? Like Michael Choice, right? Like there's so many of these guys that have everything except that one thing. And I think with the Orioles, they have had a lot of success with a good number of their guys. They've had some guys though that are kind of still showing the same tendencies that they showed in college, in the minor leagues right now. So I don't think it's a guarantee of anything. But I do think that if you are a scouting department and you trust your coaching staff to coach up certain areas, absolutely you should go take the tools that are best if you believe that your coaches can help a guy. And if they do, then I think that's the way you should do this. Like if you're a major league organization, you should be investing on the best coaches that you can, because if you can find talent and have coaches that can translate that talent, you're going to be outpacing everybody. And if the Orioles feel that way right now, and proof seems to be in the pudding at the moment, Honeycutt will be a good pick for him.
Yeah, the one thing that can happen is you can make a strength into a weakness by saying, oh, we have really good, we develop pitchers really good. Let's just take hitters for the first 4 rounds and not putting, good stuff into, the quote unquote meat grinder or whatever, putting, in terms of like Cijntje, I like that. I like that pick because they are a good organization, it seems, for developing pitching. And why not take a high pick and put somebody with like a lot of upside into that, because you can argue either way. You can be like, oh, we can develop this up, so let's take a guy who can't who strikes out too much and hope our coaches can fix it. We think we can do that. Why not take somebody who, does make contact and make him even better? So I don't know. Every team that we give the kind of bulletproof, every team that we're like, this is the team, they know what they're doing. Just give them another draft.
Well, I also think too, it kills me when people are like, oh, these guys can't develop X kind of prospect, we should never take that prospect. Then the problem is the coaching, right? Like you can fix that. You're not stuck with the same coaches forever. Like you can bring somebody in.
Well, the A's are.
Well, yeah. But I mean, but it's like that shouldn't be the thing. The thing should be you find the best coaches there so that you can take the best talent. And, if that's what the Orioles have found that they're doing now, obviously, I think if you look at their organizational strength right now, they could use some pitching. But if the best pitching wasn't there at that point in the draft, it's silly to bypass a hitter that you can turn something into just because you want to force it with the pitcher there.
Is that Ken Caminiti's kid that went to the Braves?
No, it's his cousin.
Okay.
Which so Cam, he said on the call, he was not born yet when Ken was playing. If you want to feel really,
nice.
Yeah, but he was an interesting one because the Giants were connected to him. I mean, for more than a year, and it was very interesting to see them go with the more fast track established outfield bat, given the pace at which they've moved a lot of their prospects over the last couple of years. They went with a guy that should probably move fairly quickly over the longer play high school pitcher that they had been sort of rumored to be connected to for a while.
So I'm curious, we've got a handful of picks in for a few teams already. Who's got the best foundation as far as the possible best draft classes so far based on the early portion of the draft this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a little early because I think the day 2 picks are really important. And so I would hate to shortchange, what's going to go on today. I like what Colorado did. I think if you're going to maximize those 2 picks and picking from where they picked, they did a really good job there. I think Kansas City, they're the both star power and the, what they've got coming in is pretty good. I'm always intrigued by what Milwaukee does. I think what they put together every year, is really fascinating. fascinating. And, even though theirs was sort of the surprise, why did you take that guy that early kind of thing, I think you could start to see the shape of what they were doing with the rest of the picks in day one. So
they took both high schoolers?
Yeah.
And where's the Pennington?
And then they also took Blake Burke, who, he's an East Bay guy out here from De La Salle High School, so I followed him a long time. But he's a big power guy, first base. He could move pretty quickly from Tennessee. So they have a pretty good variety there. But they've got 3 high school pitchers. Blake Burke, the big, first baseman and a high school outfielder. And so, it's an interesting mix there. And, and they have the teams that have money to play with a little bit too. The Nationals picking up extra room and being able to take Seaver King at the top and then still kind of swing big later on with that extra, cap room is good. And, I think Caleb Lomavita, who was their last pick, the Cal catcher, he obviously needs work with pitch recognition, but he's the best athlete at the catching position, I felt like, from this draft, and should be kind of an interesting guy to follow. Pirates
follow up a high school shortstop with a high school shortstop.
Yeah. Well, again, I think the question is, Connor Griffin's big. Like he's when I met him at the combine, like he was the most physically imposing player of the guys I met. Maybe he sticks at shortstop because now guys can be 6'7", but
they have a 6'7" shortstop.
Yeah, exactly. But I could very well see him playing a really good center field too. So I don't think that's probably going to run into a big problem for them. As they say in baseball, it's a good problem to have, and it'll work itself out. So
right. Well, you just wonder if it'll work itself out for that regime. It's like they're probably feeling some pressure to win.
Yeah, you would hope so.
They didn't panic though.
No,
so
but with the talent they have right now, you would hope that something starts to come together pretty soon there, because it would be a shame to waste any of the years of some of these guys that they've got on the roster right
now. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it looks like Braden Montgomery might be one of the first round air quotes values, right? Guys that slipped a little more than expected. The Red Sox getting him at 12 when I think he was 4th or 5th on a lot of boards. That's kind of a good start. And what you do on day 2 determines whether or not you just got a good value in round 1, or if you actually put together a really nice collection of talent on top of getting a player that may not have been there. JJ Weatherholt going to the Cardinals at 7 probably sets up the Cardinals for a little more of a boost in this draft than expected, because I don't know if many people thought he'd actually be there for them.
Yeah, the Red Sox, that's 2 years in a row. Kyle Teal really kind of slipped down to them too. So, they've been, I wouldn't say fortunate, because they still could have passed on him, but I think they did a really good job there both years with getting the player that probably had the highest value at that moment. And I think what was also interesting is they took a pitcher in the 2nd round, and Jen McCaffrey noted that that's the first time they've picked a pitcher in the first 2 rounds since 2017 when they took Tanner Houck. So, the influence of seeing, Breslow and seeing Andrew Bailey and, all the kind of pitching infrastructure they're starting to build with the Red Sox that they really didn't have the last few years. I think you sort of see that influence there. And it'll be interesting to see what they do in day 2 too.
The Montgomery fell maybe because of, he was wheeling himself around on the little.
It was an interesting look, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like here's our 1st round pick. He's got an ankle that doesn't work.
It's so weird because, obviously, A, I'm not a doctor, and B, I have no, look at these medical reports. Everyone says that it's not going to be a problem, so that it's a non-bearing bone in his ankle, whatever that means. And so we should just be, totally trusting that it's going to be fine. Ankle injuries always scare me, but, at the same time, again, he's very, very talented hitter, switch hitter, which there's not that many of those, even pro ball at all anymore, let alone at this point in the draft. He was actually a 2-way player at Stanford before he went to Texas A&M. Huge arm, really good athlete, extremely smart kid. So there's a lot of upside with someone like him. And if the ankle's not going to deteriorate into termites, like Grant likes to say about Carlos Correa's ankle, I think.
Yeah, right. That Correa's ankle is what I was thinking about.
I just saw plantar fasciitis for Carlos Correa going into the All-Star break.
Yeah,
fantastic.
I went his feet. Yeah.
I feel like I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but there were a couple other guys that sort of fell due to injury.
Yeah, injuries are such a funny thing because it's like again, we don't see the medicals. And what I thought was most interesting when I was at the combine this year is how much of the time those guys spend like literally in MRI tubes. Like all these guys get like fully body scanned and all that. So there
was a benefit to going to, I saw something, there was a benefit to the player if he went to the combine, and the benefit to the teams was they get like their own medicals. You go through a full medical through the combine.
Basically, if a player agrees to go through the full medical at the combine and they get selected, they have to be offered at least, I think, 75% of slot, even if some medicals that would scare off a player. So like in the Kumar Rocker situation, had he gone through those medicals there, he would have been guaranteed a certain amount of money that, the Mets would have had to pay at that point. But he hadn't gone through the medicals because probably
they couldn't even refuse to sign him after seeing the medicals.
I guess I think if they take him, because they already have the medicals going in. So I guess okay. They have the information ahead of them. If they make the decision to go forward anyway,
then they have to do 75%.
Yeah, they can't. They've got to do the 75%. I don't know that anyone's ever actually gotten to take advantage of that yet. But there were a lot of guys going through those MRI tubes at the combine. So I think it's certainly an option that a lot of those guys were taking.
Mm-hmm. Nothing about an MRI looks fun. Like
no, it's I've
zero
done
parts.
Several. They're really not. Yeah,
they look
even if they
terrible.
put a little classical music on with the headphones while you're in there, it's not, because it's like classical music and then the beeping and the bangs and that's.
I didn't even get that. I just got the beeping and bangs and the white. You're just looking at white and it's really you would have to think of all the medical advancements. That's one they've got to figure out a better way. How to get a TV in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like at the dentist, they give you those
exactly. That's been wonders for dentistry for kids. I'm sorry.
And adults
and adults too. I appreciated that last time I had to go to the dentist. Melissa, is there anyone we haven't talked about either that got drafted already or will be drafted in the next 48 hours that you thought has a particularly interesting story, or maybe someone that could be a little bit of a deep sleeper that people aren't necessarily talking enough about?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this was a pretty straightforward class. I really like Slade Caldwell. I think that pick at 29 for the Arizona Diamondbacks was really fun. He's listed at 5'9". There's no way, but he's very physically built. Really tools out, very 80 grade on his personality. And I think they've shown already they can do pretty well with diminutive outfielders with good tools. So he's kind of a fun guy. I'll be interested to see where Michael Massey goes today, the Wake Forest pitcher. He had pitched through back pain like the entire year this year, had back surgery after the season. But he was really impressive when talking, and it was like fine walking around like 3 weeks later after the back surgery, which was kind of remarkable to me. But, he was really interesting in terms of talking to about pitching. And I think he's somebody that maybe an injury has, obviously pushed him out of day one, but could be an interesting one to like see a couple of years from now, because he may be day one value in day two.
Love that we're getting another Michael Massey in the.
I know. No, I think it's great. I would say there's going to be another Jared Jones taken today too. We already have 2 Max Muncies, so no, we're gonna. I think a whole like all-star team of people with the same names on either side would be just amazing. So
all my Excel sheets are dying.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Those
Will Smiths,
the Will Smiths, the Luis Garcias. They've been cooked for a while now. Before we let you go, Melissa, one last question. Do you know why this draft is being held at Cowtown Coliseum of all venues?
I don't know. I don't know. There's so many things I don't understand. Like last night, I think ESPN just turned off their program after the 30th pick. MLB Network, they were just announcing the picks for the rest of the night at the desk. And, Melanie did a great job, but like they weren't announcing them at the Cowtown place. They were just putting their names up on a board, which is kind of crazy. I mean, these are like first round equivalent talents to not treat it that way. Major League Baseball makes some very interesting decisions when it comes to production value and also promoting the young people in their. I mean, they're holding their all-star pressers right now in the middle of day 3, day 2, third round picks. Like, why are we shoving this all into one weekend? Like, give these things some space. I'd really like to let these kids have more time to be known and talked about because we've already moved on to the home run derby. You know, like it's not really fair to a lot of the work that goes into this to have it kind of blinked away like that. So, but yeah, Cowtown, I mean, if you're really trying to relate to the kids, Cowtown USA is it, you know.
We got a GIF now of Rob Manfred coming through saloon doors, which we really need to have.
We're going to have a lot of things we can have to do with that.
Yeah, that's memeable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we have that now. That's cool. But yeah, it's always great to catch up to you, Melissa. Great insight. Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, so we're going to head out. Quick reminder before we go, you can get all of our draft coverage from The Athletic at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. Get a subscription. It's $2 a month if you don't have one already. Hopefully you already have that. You can find us all on Twitter. You can find Melissa at Melissa Lockard, find Eno at Eno Saris, find me at Derek Van Riper, and find the pod at Rates and Barrels. It's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.